Can you imagine being thrown out of your own house at 15, during a freezing October storm, because your own family decided you were disposable? Because that was the last thing my father said to me before he slammed the door in my face and locked it. No jacket. No phone. No money. Just a backpack full of homework and rain already soaking through my shoes. 3 hours later, the police called him. And whatever they told him made the color drain from his face. But by then, the damage was already done. My name is Lena Whitmore. I'm 28 now, living in a small Boston apartment with rain streaking down my windows as I write this. On my kitchen table sits a thin envelope from a nursing home. The handwriting is shaky. The message inside is simple. My father is dying. He wants forgiveness. Funny how rain always pulls me back to the night everything broke. October. Cold. And the moment my family chose money over me. Before I decide whether to open that door again, you need to know what really happened, and how the people who tried to erase me ended up destroying themselves. I still remember the smell of bleach when I walked through the front door that night. It was sharp, stinging, the kind my father used when he wanted the house to feel clean before company came over. I was 15, exhausted from school, rain dripping off my sneakers, my backpack heavy with textbooks and unfinished essays. I remember thinking dinner might already be cooking. It wasn't. The living room lights were on too bright, like an interrogation room. My father stood near the coffee table, his jaw clenched so tight a vein pulsed in his neck. In his hand was a clear plastic bag. Inside were pill bottles. Empty ones. Beside him sat a thick envelope, folded, bulging with cash. Rachel was there too, my older sister, leaning against the hallway wall with her arms crossed. She didn't look surprised to see me. She looked prepared. "Where did you get this?" my father demanded before I could even say hello. I stared at the bag, confused. "What is that?" "Don't play dumb," he snapped. "We found it in your room." My heart dropped straight into my stomach. "That's not mine." Rachel scoffed. "Of course you'd say that." I stepped closer, panic creeping up my spine. "Dad, I swear. I don't even know what those are." He slammed the envelope onto the table. Cash spilled out. Hundreds. Way more money than I'd ever touched in my life. "And this," he said. "You expect me to believe this just appeared?" I shook my head so hard it hurt. "I didn't take any money. You know I wouldn't." Rachel finally pushed off the wall, her voice calm, controlled. "I tried to protect you," she said softly. "I really did. But I found the pills weeks ago. I thought it was a phase. Then money started disappearing." I turned to her, stunned. "Why are you lying?" Her eyes flicked away for half a second. Then she looked back at me, perfectly composed. "I'm not." That was the moment I realized this wasn't an argument. It was a verdict. My father's face hardened. "Your mother would be ashamed," he said. That sentence cracked something inside me. My mom had been gone 3 years by then, and he knew exactly how to use her memory like a weapon. "I didn't do this," I whispered. "Please. Just listen to me." He didn't. He walked to the front door and yanked it open. Cold air and rain rushed in, slapping against my face. "Get your things." I froze. "What?" "You're not staying here," he said. "Not like this. Not until you admit what you've done." "I didn't do anything." My voice broke. Rachel grabbed my backpack from the floor and shoved it into my chest. "You need help," she said quietly. "And you can't get it here." Help. Like I was already guilty. I stepped onto the porch, rain soaking my socks instantly. "Dad, please," I begged. "I'll do anything. Drug test me. Call my school. Call anyone. He wouldn't meet my eyes. The door slammed shut. The lock clicked. I stood there for a full 10 seconds, staring at the wood grain of the door I'd grown up behind. Then I knocked. Once. Twice. Harder. Nothing. That was the night I stopped being someone's daughter. That was the night my family decided I was disposable. And the storm outside was only just beginning. The rain didn't fall gently that night. It came down hard, cold, and relentless, soaking through my clothes in seconds. I stood on the porch for a moment after the door slammed, half expecting it to open again. Half expecting my father to realize he'd made a mistake. It didn't. So I stepped off the porch and into the storm. I didn't have a phone. My father had taken it months earlier as punishment for attitude. I didn't have a jacket either. Just a thin hoodie, already heavy with water. My backpack dug into my shoulders, stuffed with school books that suddenly felt useless. The streetlights blurred as rain streaked across my eyes. Cars passed, tires hissing through puddles, drivers staring straight ahead. No one stopped. No one slowed down. I might as well have been invisible. I knew only one place I could go. My grandmother Evelyn lived just under 4 miles away. Normally, it was a bus ride or a bike trip. That night, it was a long, dangerous walk through freezing rain and darkness. But it was either that or nowhere. So I walked. Each step felt heavier than the last. Water seeped into my sneakers until my feet were numb. My hands shook so badly I had to clench them into fists just to keep moving. The wind cut through me like broken glass, and every few minutes I had to wipe rain from my eyes just to see the road. As I walked, the shock wore off. What replaced it was fear. What if my grandmother didn't answer? What if she believed them too? What if I collapsed before I got there? My thoughts spiraled, each one darker than the last. I replayed my father's words over and over, trying to understand how he could believe I was capable of something like that. How easily he'd chosen Rachel's story over mine. The road grew quieter as I left the neighborhood. No sidewalks. Just wet asphalt and the occasional flash of headlights. My legs started to cramp, my breathing shallow and uneven. I couldn't tell if the tightness in my chest was cold or panic. About 2 miles in, my vision started to blur. I remember stumbling. Catching myself on a mailbox. Laughing weakly at how ridiculous it was, me, shivering in the rain, carrying algebra homework like it mattered. The laughter turned into sobbing. I dropped to the side of the road, hugging my backpack to my chest, rain plastering my hair to my face. For a moment, I considered staying there. Letting the storm swallow me. It felt easier than taking another step. But then I thought of my mom. How she used to braid my hair before school. How she'd tell me I was stronger than I knew. How she'd never have let this happen. I forced myself up. I don't remember much after that. Just flashes. A sharp pain in my ankle. The world tilting sideways. Cold so deep it felt like sleep. At some point, my legs gave out completely. I collapsed near the edge of the road, backpack slipping from my shoulders, rain pooling around me. I tried to call out, but my voice was gone. My fingers wouldn't move. My body felt distant, like it belonged to someone else. The last thing I remember before everything went dark was the sound of an engine slowing. And then... nothing. That storm didn't just soak my clothes. It washed away the last illusion I had that my family would save me. But it also carried me towards someone who would. When I woke up, the first thing I noticed was warmth. Not the uncomfortable, suffocating kind, but steady and gentle, like a thick blanket fresh from the dryer. The second thing was the beeping. Slow. Rhythmic. Too controlled to be part of the storm I'd just escaped. I tried to move and realized I couldn't. Panic surged until a calm voice cut through it. Easy. You're safe. I turned my head. A woman sat beside the hospital bed, her gray hair pulled back neatly, glasses resting low on her nose. She wasn't wearing scrubs, just a wool coat draped over the chair behind her. My name is Margaret Hale, she said softly. You gave us quite a scare. Memory rushed back in fragments, rain, cold, darkness, headlights. I swallowed, my throat raw. Where am I? Boston General, she replied. You were found unconscious on the side of Route 14. I closed my eyes, shame washing over me. I'm sorry. Margaret smiled gently. For surviving? That was the moment I started crying. Not quiet tears. Full, shaking sobs that came from somewhere deep and broken. I tried to apologize again, but she stopped me, placing a warm hand over mine. I spent 35 years with Child Protective Services, she said calmly. I know what neglect looks like. And I know what it does to kids. I froze. She wasn't accusing. She wasn't probing. She was stating a fact. The doctor came in shortly after, explaining hypothermia, dehydration, a sprained ankle. Margaret stayed the entire time, asking questions, taking notes, making sure I was treated like I mattered. When the room cleared, she leaned closer. Do you want to tell me how you ended up out there? I hesitated. Loyalty still tugged at me, even then. Fear too. But something about her, maybe the way she waited without pushing, made it easier to breathe. So I told her everything. About the pills. The money. Rachel's lies. My father's face when he decided I wasn't worth believing. The door locking behind me. Margaret didn't interrupt once. When I finished, she nodded slowly. Thank you for telling me the truth. The truth. Not your side. Not what you think happened. The truth. She made a call right there in the room. CPS. Not as a stranger, but as someone who knew the system inside and out. She used words like abandonment and immediate risk. Words that carried weight. Within hours, a social worker arrived. Then another. Questions were asked, carefully, respectfully. Statements taken. My father was contacted. He didn't come. Rachel didn't call. Instead, Margaret arranged for me to stay with her temporarily while emergency custody was sorted. Just until things are clear, she said. That night, she drove me to her house in Brookline. It was modest, warm, filled with books and the smell of soup. She set me up on the couch with blankets and tea, like I was expected. Like I belonged. As I drifted off, I realized something terrifying and comforting at the same time. A stranger had done more for me in one night than my own family had done in years. The next morning, CPS informed us they'd opened a formal investigation. Rachel's story was already cracking under basic questions. Bank records. Pharmacy logs. School attendance. Margaret looked at me over breakfast and said, "This won't be easy. But you're not alone anymore." For the first time since my mother died, I believed it. That storm had nearly taken my life. But it also delivered me to someone who refused to look away. And that changed everything. By the end of the first week, my life felt like it had been turned inside out and laid under a microscope. CPS moved fast. Faster than I expected. Faster than Rachel ever imagined they would. 2 social workers visited Margaret's house within 48 hours. They asked about everything: school, finances, medications, my father's behavior before and after my mother died. They weren't cold or suspicious. They were thorough, which somehow felt kinder. What shocked me most was how calm I felt telling the truth. No yelling. No punishment. No sighs of disappointment. Just notes being taken and quiet nods as if everything I said made sense, because it did. Meanwhile, the cracks in Rachel's story widened. The first break came from the pharmacy. CPS subpoenaed records for the pain medication Rachel claimed I'd stolen. The refill history didn't match her accusation. The pills were being picked up early. Too early. And not by me. Then came the bank statements. Rachel had insisted I took cash from my father's desk. But the withdrawals told a different story: consistent transfers, always following prescription refills, always routed through Rachel's account. Thousands of dollars over 2 years. She hadn't just framed me. She'd been running a quiet operation. The school weighed in next. Attendance records showed I'd been absent repeatedly on days Rachel claimed I was acting out. Teachers submitted written statements describing me as withdrawn but respectful, struggling but never disruptive. One guidance counselor noted something that made my chest ache: student often asks if fees can be waived. Seems afraid of being a burden. CPS interviewed my father 3 days later. He called me that night. His voice was tight, defensive. He said CPS was overreacting. That Rachel was stressed. That families handled things privately. I asked him one question. Did you check the bank records? Silence. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked. Rachel said you were manipulating everyone. I laughed, sharp and humorless. Funny. That's what she said about you. The next morning, CPS escalated the case. Emergency custody was granted to Margaret on a temporary basis. Rachel was ordered to vacate the house pending investigation. My father was required to attend supervised interviews. Rachel didn't go quietly. She called, screamed, cried, begged. Left voicemails accusing me of ruining her life, of betraying the family, of being ungrateful. When that didn't work, she switched tactics, claiming I was mentally unstable, that I made everything up. CPS didn't flinch. Evidence doesn't care how convincing your tears are. The final blow came from a source no one expected: Rachel's sister. She contacted CPS anonymously at first, then agreed to a formal statement. She said Rachel had done something similar years ago with an elderly aunt. Missing money. Pills disappearing. Stories spun to redirect blame. Nothing had been proven back then. Now, it all fit. By the end of week 2, Rachel was formally charged with prescription fraud and financial exploitation. The word arrest echoed in my head when Margaret told me. I didn't feel joy. I felt light. Like a weight I didn't know I was carrying had finally been set down. My father came to see me the day after charges were filed. He looked smaller somehow, older. He tried to apologize, but it came out tangled, excuses mixed with regret. I should have listened, he said. I should have protected you. I didn't forgive him then. I just nodded. Because healing isn't a switch you flip. It's a process. And some wounds need to breathe before they can close. That night, sitting in Margaret's living room, I realized something quietly powerful. Rachel hadn't lost because I fought her. She lost because the truth finally had room to speak. And once it did, her lies didn't stand a chance. Once the investigation went public, everything changed, especially how people looked at me. The whispers started first. At church. At the grocery store. At school pickup lines I no longer stood in. Rachel's version of events had traveled fast when she wanted sympathy. The truth traveled slower, but it traveled heavier. Local news picked up the story after Rachel's arrest. Not my name, thank God, but enough details for people to connect the dots. Woman charged with prescription fraud involving family member. The wording was clinical, almost gentle, but the implications were brutal. People began reaching out. A former neighbor messaged Margaret saying she'd always felt something was off. A teacher emailed me privately to say she was proud of me for surviving something no kid should. Even my aunt, Rachel's own sister, called, her voice shaking as she apologized for not speaking up sooner. The narrative shifted. Rachel wasn't the overwhelmed stepmother anymore. She was the woman who'd weaponized authority and played victim while draining everyone around her. And me? I was no longer difficult. I was believed. That belief changed how I walked into rooms. How I spoke. How I breathed. CPS transitioned my placement from temporary to extended guardianship under Margaret. The caseworker explained my options carefully, respectfully, like my voice mattered. For the first time in years, decisions about my life were being made with me, not over me. School improved almost immediately. Not because classes got easier, but because fear stopped choking my focus. I joined an after-school writing group. I raised my hand again. I stopped apologizing every time I spoke. Margaret noticed everything. She never pushed. Never pried. She just showed up, rides to school, quiet dinners, notes tucked into my backpack that said things like "you don't have to earn safety." My father tried, in his clumsy way, to be present. Therapy was mandated for him, and I could tell it rattled his sense of control. He'd built his life on avoidance. Accountability didn't suit him. Still, he came to sessions when invited. Listened more than he spoke. Sometimes cried. I didn't rush forgiveness. I learned that healing isn't about making others comfortable. Rachel, meanwhile, unraveled. Court appearances stripped her of performance. No makeup. No theatrics that worked. The judge wasn't impressed by tears that arrived on cue. The evidence spoke louder than her voice ever could. She tried to look at me during one hearing. I didn't look back. That was my revenge, not anger, not speeches, not closure conversations she didn't deserve. Just indifference. She no longer occupied space in my mind. The power dynamic had flipped completely. She'd spent years telling me I was nothing without her. Now she was nothing without the lies. And everyone could see it. The final shift came quietly. One afternoon, as Margaret and I sat on the porch watching the sun dip low, she asked me what I wanted next. Not what I should do. Not what was expected. What I wanted. No one had ever asked me that before. I said I wanted stability. College. Space to become someone without fear shaping every choice. She smiled and said, "Then we'll build toward that." In that moment, I understood something important. Revenge doesn't always look like confrontation. Sometimes it looks like walking forward while the person who tried to destroy you is stuck explaining themselves to a world that finally stopped listening. Rachel took years from me. But she didn't get my future. And that, more than any punishment, was the justice she never saw coming. Freedom feels strange when you've lived without it for so long. At first, I kept waiting for something bad to happen. For the rug to be pulled out. For someone to tell me this piece was temporary, conditional, borrowed. Trauma trains you to expect the drop even when the ground feels solid. But days passed. Then weeks. And nothing broke. Margaret helped me move the last of my things from my father's house on a Saturday morning. Rachel wasn't allowed anywhere near the property, but her presence lingered in small, ugly ways: scratched furniture, passive-aggressive notes she'd left behind, a faint chemical smell in the bathroom where she used to hide the pills. I didn't take much. A few clothes. My laptop. A shoebox of photos from before my mom died. That was enough. Back at Margaret's place, we turned the spare room into something that felt like mine. Not perfect. Not Instagram ready. Just safe. Light blue walls. A real desk. A lamp that worked. A door that closed without being slammed open. That door mattered more than I expected. Therapy became part of my weekly routine, not as punishment, not as fixing, but as maintenance. Like learning how to breathe again after being underwater too long. My therapist helped me put words to things I'd buried: hypervigilance, parentification, emotional neglect. She said something once that stuck with me: you adapted to survive. That doesn't mean you were the problem. I carried that sentence everywhere. School counselors helped me map a path forward. Scholarships. Applications. Deadlines that felt terrifying but exciting. I stopped shrinking my ambitions to make others comfortable. Stopped assuming I didn't deserve space at the table. I started writing again. At first just for me, late at night, headphones in, pouring everything onto the page. Then I shared a piece with my writing group. My hands shook as I read it out loud. When I finished, no one laughed. No one dismissed it. They clapped. One girl hugged me afterward and said my words made her feel less alone. I cried in the bathroom for 10 minutes after that. Not because I was sad. Because I finally felt seen for something other than my pain. Rachel tried one last move from jail, an attempt to contact me through a mutual acquaintance, framing herself as misunderstood, blaming stress, saying she forgave me for what I'd done. I didn't respond. Silence is a boundary too. My father sent letters. Some were rambling. Some defensive. A few genuinely reflective. I read them when I felt strong enough. Put them away when I didn't. I learned I didn't owe anyone access just because they shared my blood. That was another kind of freedom. The biggest change wasn't external. It was internal. I stopped narrating my life like I was the villain in someone else's story. Stopped apologizing for existing. Stopped believing love had to hurt to be real. One evening, Margaret found me filling out college applications at the kitchen table, surrounded by papers and half-drunk mugs of tea. She looked at me and said, "You know, you're not broken. You were just unheard." Something clicked. All those years Rachel told me I was too much, too sensitive, too difficult. It had never been about me. It had been about control. And control loses power the moment you step out of its reach. I mailed my applications that week. Not with fear. With hope. Because the girl Rachel tried to erase? She wasn't gone. She was just waiting for a life where she could finally take up space. And this time, no one was taking that away from me. I didn't expect closure to arrive quietly. It showed up in a white envelope with my name spelled correctly for once. The return address was a state correctional facility. I stared at it for a full minute before opening it, my pulse loud in my ears. Some part of me wanted to throw it away unopened, let the past rot behind concrete walls where it belonged. But another part, the one therapy had taught me to trust, needed to know what was inside so it could finally stop guessing. Rachel's handwriting was smaller than I remembered. Less confident. Like she'd learned what it felt like to be powerless. She didn't apologize right away. That came later in the letter, buried beneath explanations and justifications. She wrote about pressure. About expectations. About how everything spiraled after our mom died and how she felt invisible unless she was perfect. Then came the line that made my stomach drop. I didn't think they'd believe me so easily. That sentence told me everything I needed to know. She admitted she'd never expected my father to throw me out that night. She thought he'd scare me. Control me. Put me somewhere, temporarily. She said the storm was bad timing, as if weather was an inconvenience, not the reason I almost died. She said she panicked when the police got involved. She said she was sorry. I folded the letter and didn't cry. Not because it didn't hurt, but because it no longer owned me. A week later, my father reached out through his lawyer, asking if I'd be willing to meet. He was sick. Not dying, but not well either. High blood pressure. Heart issues. The usual collection of consequences people accumulate when they spend years avoiding accountability. I didn't answer right away. Margaret didn't push. She never did. "What do you want?" she asked instead. So I sat with that question. I realized I didn't want revenge anymore. Not the loud kind. Not the courtroom spectacle or the dramatic confrontation. What I wanted was truth, spoken out loud, without excuses. I agreed to meet him. Public place. 1 hour. No Rachel. No lawyers. He looked smaller than I remembered. Older. The anger that used to fill a room before he entered it was gone, replaced by something like regret that had nowhere to go. He apologized. Properly this time. No, if. No, but. He admitted he'd failed me. Admitted he'd chosen the path of least resistance instead of protecting his child. Admitted he'd known, deep down, that Rachel's story didn't add up, but it was easier to believe it than to confront the truth. I was afraid, he said. And I let that make me cruel. I didn't forgive him in that moment. I told him forgiveness wasn't a transaction. It wasn't something he could earn by saying the right words. It was something I might, or might not, arrive at someday. And that had to be enough. We parted without hugs. Without promises. Just honesty. That night, I wrote Rachel back. Not to absolve her. Not to comfort her. But to reclaim my voice. I told her she didn't get to rewrite what she did. That understanding her pain didn't excuse her choices. That what she took from me, my safety, my trust, my childhood, wasn't something she could ever return. And then I told her the most important part. I survived you. I wished her accountability. Not peace. Not redemption. Accountability. I sealed the envelope and felt lighter than I had in years. Because closure didn't come from watching them fall. It came from standing still while the truth finally caught up to them. And walking forward without carrying their shame with me. For the first time, the past was behind bars, and I was free. The strange thing about healing is that it doesn't announce itself. There was no single morning where I woke up and thought, I'm free now. It happened gradually, in moments so ordinary they almost went unnoticed. Buying furniture I actually liked instead of what was cheapest. Sleeping through thunderstorms without flinching. Letting people get close without bracing for impact. I moved to Boston 2 years after college, chasing a job offer that felt too big for someone with my past. A marketing coordinator role at a mid-sized tech company. Nothing glamorous. But it was mine. I showed up early, stayed late, asked questions, and learned fast. Every promotion felt like proof, not to anyone else, but to myself, that I wasn't broken goods. That I hadn't been the problem, like they said. Margaret used to tell me, the best revenge is stability. At the time, I thought it was something people said when they didn't understand anger. Now I know it was wisdom. I built routines. Morning runs along the Charles River. Sunday grocery trips. Weekly calls with Margaret, who still asked if I was eating enough vegetables like I was 15 instead of 28. I kept therapy appointments even when things felt fine, because I learned that maintenance mattered just as much as repair. And then there was Evan. We met in the most unremarkable way possible, standing in line at a coffee shop during a snowstorm. He joked about Boston weather being a personality trait. I laughed, surprised by how easy it felt. No sparks. No drama. Just calm curiosity. He didn't rush me. Didn't push for explanations. When I eventually told him pieces of my story, he listened without trying to fix it or frame himself as the hero. He believed me. That alone felt radical. The past still surfaced sometimes. A slammed door. A raised voice. An offhand comment that hit too close to something old. But now I had tools. Boundaries. A support system. A sense of self that didn't collapse under pressure. On the anniversary of the night I was thrown out, I did something symbolic. I walked 7 miles, not in the rain, not in fear, but on a clear October morning, wearing running shoes and a jacket I chose. I ended at Margaret's house, where she waited with coffee and a smile that said everything words didn't need to. I didn't think about my father that day. Or Rachel. Not because they didn't matter, but because they no longer defined the narrative. A few months later, I got a final update through a mutual acquaintance. Rachel had violated probation. Nothing dramatic. Missed check-ins. Bad decisions. Patterns repeating themselves. I felt no satisfaction hearing it. Just distance. Like reading about strangers in a news article. And that's when I knew I'd truly won. Not because they suffered. But because their choices no longer shaped my emotional weather. I was promoted again last spring. Senior role. Corner office with a view I still pause to appreciate. Evan proposed that same month, quietly, thoughtfully, exactly how I'd want it. Margaret cried when I told her, then immediately asked about venues like she hadn't just met him 6 months earlier. We're planning a small wedding. Nothing extravagant. People who know us. People who showed up. Sometimes, late at night, when rain taps against the windows, I think about that girl with soaked sneakers and a backpack full of homework. I wish I could reach back through time and tell her what I know now. That this wasn't the end. That being discarded didn't mean being disposable. That survival could turn into something stronger than revenge. It could turn into a life so full, so grounded, so undeniably yours, that the people who tried to erase you fade into irrelevance. And that is the quiet victory they never saw coming. Some people think revenge has to be loud, courtrooms, screaming matches, public humiliation. But the most powerful revenge is living so well that the people who tried to destroy you no longer recognize the version of you that survived them. I was thrown into a storm and left to disappear. Instead, I learned how to stand in the rain without fear. They kept the lies. I kept the life. And that will always be enough.